God is up to something. We all face moments in life when things don't make sense. We experience pain, disappointment, and confusion. It can feel like we're walking through a storm with no clear end in sight. But in these moments, we must remember something powerful and comforting: God is up to something. Life often presents us with circumstances that leave us feeling confused, uncertain, or even hopeless. We encounter situations that challenge our understanding of the world, and we question why things happen the way they do. We struggle with unanswered prayers, broken dreams, and situations that feel like they will never improve. During these moments, it can be easy to feel that we are walking alone, or that everything around us is falling apart. However, even in the midst of our confusion and struggles, we must remember one powerful truth: God's plan is always bigger than our understanding. When we face trials, we tend to focus on the immediate, the tangible, and the visible. We look for solutions in the here and now, seeking answers to our questions and wishing for a quick resolution to our pain. But often the answers we seek don't come immediately, and the path forward is not as clear as we would like. This is where faith comes in. It's in these moments that we are called to trust that God's plan for our lives is far greater than we can comprehend. God sees the bigger picture, and His plans for us are intricately woven into the fabric of our lives, designed in ways we may never fully understand in the moment. God's plan operates on a much broader scale than our limited perspective can grasp. In our human experience, we tend to think in terms of what is right in front of us. We see our present struggles and we may feel overwhelmed by them. Yet God sees not just our present, but our past, our future, and the endless possibilities that lie ahead. He is not confined by time as we are. Where we see a setback, God sees an opportunity for growth. Where we see failure, God sees a lesson to be learned. His vision encompasses everything, and He is constantly working in ways that we cannot always see or understand. Take, for instance, the story of the Israelites. When they were in bondage in Egypt, their suffering seemed endless, and the promise of deliverance seemed so distant. The journey to freedom was not a simple one, nor was it immediate. Yet, even in the darkest hours, God was preparing them for a greater purpose. He was shaping their identity as a people, refining their hearts, and teaching them lessons they would need for the future. What they couldn't see in the moment was that every challenge they faced was part of a greater plan that would ultimately lead them to the promised land. Similarly, in our own lives, we may find ourselves facing struggles that appear to have no purpose. We may feel trapped in situations that seem impossible to escape. Yet, God, in His wisdom, knows exactly what He is doing. Our trials are not meaningless; they are stepping stones leading us to something greater. God's plan involves far more than our immediate comfort or convenience. He is shaping us, preparing us, and guiding us toward a future that we can't yet envision. His plan encompasses our entire life journey, and while we may not understand every twist and turn along the way, we can trust that every step is part of His divine design. One of the most challenging aspects of trusting God's plan is surrendering control. As humans, we often try to control the outcomes of our lives. We want to know how things will unfold, and we want things to happen on our timeline. However, God's timing is not our timing. He doesn't operate according to our deadlines, and His ways are not always in line with what we think is best. This can be difficult, especially when we are in the midst of uncertainty. We may find ourselves asking, why is this happening to me, or why is this taking so long? But God's ways are always perfect, and His timing is flawless. He knows when we are ready for the next step, even when we don't feel prepared. Trusting in His plan requires patience and faith, knowing that He will never lead us astray. In the moments when we feel lost or confused, it's essential to remember that God is never absent from our lives. Even when we don't see Him working, He is there, orchestrating events behind the scenes. We may not be able to understand how everything fits together, but we can trust that He is at work in ways that we can't yet see. God's plan is unfolding in our lives, even in the most difficult of times, and He is always guiding us towards something greater than we could have imagined. Think about how many times in the past we've looked back on difficult seasons and seen how they were necessary for our growth. Perhaps we didn't understand at the time why things were happening the way they were, but looking back, we can see how each experience shaped us and prepared us for what came next. The same is true for our future. Even when the path seems unclear, we can trust that God is leading us towards something good. His plan is not just about the destination, but about the journey. Along the way, He is teaching us lessons that will help us become the people we were created to be. When life feels overwhelming and we can't see the way forward, it's important to hold on to the truth that God's plan is far bigger than we can understand. Our limited perspective may prevent us from seeing the bigger picture, but we can trust that He sees everything and is working all things together for our good. God's plan for our lives is perfect, even when we can't fully grasp it. Our role is to trust, to have faith, and to know that no matter what we're going through, He is always up to something bigger than we can imagine. Life is full of challenges and struggles, and it's often in the midst of these difficulties that we begin to question the very foundation of our faith. We wonder why things happen the way they do, why the journey is so difficult, and why we have to endure so much pain. It's in these moments when we are faced with adversity that we must recognize something essential. Growth often comes through struggles. We don't like to think about it, and we certainly don't want to experience it, but the reality is that our most significant transformations often occur during the most challenging times in our lives. We live in a world that seeks comfort and ease. We are taught to avoid pain and to seek pleasure. It's no surprise, then, that when we face difficulties, we tend to resist them. We want to escape the discomfort and find a way out as quickly as possible. However, the truth is that growth doesn't happen when we are in our comfort zones. Growth happens when we are stretched, tested, and forced to confront our limitations. It's when we are pushed beyond what we think we can handle that we begin to discover new strengths within ourselves. The Bible is filled with stories of individuals who experienced immense hardship but ultimately emerged stronger because of it. One of the most powerful examples of this is the story of Joseph. Joseph, the son of Jacob, was betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery. His life was filled with trials and tribulations, from being falsely accused of a crime to spending years in prison. Yet, through all of these hardships, God was shaping him, preparing him for a greater purpose. Joseph's struggles were not in vain. They were part of a process that ultimately led to his promotion and the fulfillment of God's plan for his life. He went from being a prisoner to becoming a leader in Egypt, a position that allowed him to save many people, including his own family, from famine. Joseph's story teaches us that struggles are not meaningless. They may be painful, but they are not without purpose. God uses our struggles to mold us into the people we are meant to become. In the heat of our trials, we are shaped and refined, like gold being purified in a furnace. The process may be uncomfortable, but it is necessary for us to grow and reach the fullness of our potential. Joseph's rise to prominence was not an accident. It was the result of years of preparation through hardship. The same is true for us. We may not see it in the moment, but the struggles we face are preparing us for something greater. Another powerful example of growth through struggle is the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. After being freed from slavery in Egypt, the Israelites found themselves wandering in the desert for 40 years. The journey was long, the conditions harsh, and the people frequently complained. Yet God used this time in the wilderness to shape and refine his people. He taught them to trust him, to rely on him for their daily needs, and to develop the kind of faith that would carry them into the promised land. The Israelites didn't understand it at the time, but their struggles were necessary for them to become the people God had called them to be. In our own lives, we too will face seasons of wilderness. We may feel like we are lost, wandering aimlessly, or stuck in a place that seems devoid of purpose. But even in these seasons, God is at work. He is refining us, teaching us lessons, and building the character we need for the next phase of our journey. It's easy to get frustrated when things aren't going as we had hoped, but we must remember that God uses our struggles to shape us into the people he knows we can be. Our discomfort is not a sign of abandonment, it's often a sign of divine intervention. Growth rarely happens when we are comfortable, and God knows this. He allows us to experience struggles because they are essential for our growth and development. Moreover, our struggles provide us with the opportunity to develop resilience and perseverance. When we go through hard times, we often have to dig deep within ourselves to keep going. We are forced to find strength we didn't know we had. Each challenge we face becomes an opportunity to grow stronger and more resilient. As we overcome obstacles, we learn how to navigate the storms of life with more grace and determination. Our ability to endure hardship and remain faithful through difficulty is what builds our character and prepares us for the future God has planned for us. But the process of growth through struggle is not just about individual transformation. Our struggles also prepare us to help others. When we go through hard times and emerge on the other side, we are better equipped to support those who are facing similar challenges. We can share our stories, our struggles, and the lessons we have learned with others who are in the midst of their own difficulties. Our pain becomes a source of empathy and compassion, allowing us to be a source of encouragement and strength to others. There is power in shared struggle, and often it is through helping others that we find the true purpose of our own journey. At times, it may feel like the pain we are experiencing will never end. We may question whether the struggle is worth it, and we may wonder if we will ever make it through. But we must remember that growth often comes through the struggle. The trials we face are not the end of our story, they are simply part of the process. We may not see the fruit of our labor immediately, but as we continue to persevere, we can trust that God is at work in ways we cannot fully comprehend. In the end, the struggles we face will lead us to a place of greater strength, wisdom, and purpose. When we look back on our lives, we often see that it was in the most challenging seasons that we grew the most. It's easy to appreciate the victories when they come, but it is the struggles that shape us into the people we are meant to be. So instead of resisting the pain, let us embrace it. Let us trust that God is using our struggles to refine us, to build us, and to prepare us for the future He has planned. And in doing so, we will find that the struggles we once dreaded are the very things that will lead us to the greatest growth of all. In the journey of life, we often find ourselves questioning God's presence and involvement when things aren't going the way we hoped. There are times when we experience pain, confusion, or despair, and it feels as though we are walking through life alone. In such moments, it's crucial to remember a powerful truth: God is working even when we can't see it. His activity in our lives isn't always visible to our human eyes, and we may not immediately see the impact of His work. But that doesn't mean He's absent. Even in times of silence and stillness, God is constantly at work, orchestrating events, aligning circumstances, and shaping us for the purpose He has intended. It's easy to feel disillusioned when things aren't going as planned. We pray for answers, seek guidance, and long for a clear sign that God is with us. But sometimes we don't receive the immediate responses or direction that we're hoping for. It is in these moments, especially during times of uncertainty, that we must trust that God's work in our lives is not bound by our expectations or timelines. His work is happening beneath the surface, where we cannot yet see, and it is often in these unseen moments that God is doing some of His most powerful work. God's activity doesn't always unfold in the ways we anticipate. We might expect a dramatic shift in our circumstances or a direct intervention, but often the way God works is much more subtle and patient. It's easy to want immediate results and quick fixes, but God's plan for us is often a process, and the timing is part of His purpose. We may not be able to see how things are coming together in the moment, but the truth is that God is behind the scenes, working everything for our good and for His glory. There are countless examples in Scripture of God working in ways that were not immediately visible to those involved. Take the story of Joseph, for instance. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers and sold into slavery. He was imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit, and it seemed as though his life was heading nowhere. But throughout all of his suffering, God was working in ways that Joseph could not yet see. Each seemingly devastating event in Joseph's life was actually part of a larger divine plan that would ultimately lead him to a position of influence where he could save many lives, including the lives of his own family. Joseph didn't see the bigger picture during the years of hardship, but in the end, he could look back and see how God had been at work all along. This is an essential truth for us to grasp in our own lives. When we face trials or challenges, it can be difficult to see beyond our immediate circumstances. We may wonder why things aren't working out or why God seems distant, but in reality, He is working in ways that we can't perceive. Just because we can't see the results doesn't mean that God isn't moving. His work is not limited by our understanding, and sometimes it takes time for us to see the fruit of His labor in our lives. In addition, God's timing is often different from our own. We live in a world where instant gratification is the norm, and we are accustomed to things happening quickly. We expect answers right away, and we want solutions to our problems as soon as possible. But God's timing is not based on our human schedule. He knows exactly when we are ready for the next step, and He knows what is best for us in the long run. The delays we experience, the unanswered prayers, and the waiting periods are not signs of God's absence. They are part of His perfect timing. Sometimes He allows us to wait because there are lessons to be learned, character to be built, and preparation to be done. Trusting in God's timing means having faith that He knows when and how things will unfold in our lives. Furthermore, God is not only working in the visible, tangible aspects of our lives, but also in the unseen, internal aspects of who we are. Often, we focus on the external circumstances, the job we want, the relationship we desire, the problem we want to solve, but God is working within us, shaping our hearts, our character, and our faith. While we may be focused on what's happening around us, God is focused on what's happening within us. He is teaching us patience, humility, and trust. He is refining our hearts and transforming us into the people He created us to be. Even when we can't see the outward results, God is working on the inside, changing us in ways that will have lasting impact. This unseen work is also evident in the lives of those around us. We may not be aware of how God is working in others, but He is always present, guiding and shaping them as well. We are often part of God's work in others' lives, even if we don't see it. A simple word of encouragement, a prayer offered on their behalf, or an act of kindness can be part of God's greater plan for someone else. In ways we cannot always comprehend, God uses us to be a part of the bigger picture of His work in the world. Another important aspect of trusting that God is working, even when we can't see it, is recognizing that our perspective is limited. We can only see a small part of the story, while God sees the entire narrative. We may look at a particular moment in our lives and think it's insignificant, or we may question why things are happening the way they are. But God, who sees the end from the beginning, is weaving all of the pieces together. Each step we take, each challenge we face, is part of a much larger story that we are not yet able to fully understand. But God, in His infinite wisdom, knows exactly how it all fits together. In the moments when we feel most uncertain, we must choose to trust that God is working behind the scenes. Even when we can't see His hand, we can trust His heart. His love for us is constant, and His plan for our lives is good. When life doesn't make sense and we can't see the path ahead, it is in those moments that we must lean into our faith. We may not always understand how or why God is working in certain ways, but we can trust that He is always at work, shaping us, guiding us, and preparing us for the future He has in store. So when life feels uncertain and we can't see the way forward, let's remember that God is working even when we can't see it. His presence is with us, His plan is unfolding, and His timing is perfect. Trusting in His unseen work requires patience and faith, but it is in this trust that we find peace and assurance that, no matter what, God is always at work in our lives.